Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and each week, when we can, sometimes it's not each week. Last week we had to skip a week, but we're back this week. I'm joined by some of my favorite husky, hairy, huggable homos to review films, either current or classic. This week we're going to be pulling something from the current category. We're going to be reviewing Spiral from the Book of Saw. It's kind of a mouthful of a title. What did we think of the film? We're going to share our thoughts, and we'd love to hear yours as well. So be sure to hop into the live chat with us. Let us know what you thought of the film as we're talking it through. But as I mentioned, it's more than just me on the show this week. So let me introduce my co-host. Jim Pugliafico is here with us. Hey, sweetheart, how are you?
I am now. I'm doing good. I am ready after 2 weeks since we've been together to talk about movies. So I'm really looking forward to it with you guys.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. And Will Lindis is here too. Welcome, Will.
Hey, Brad. Hey, Jim. I guess the question on my mind and everyone else's mind is, do you want to play a game?
Do you want to play a game?
Do you want to play a game?
Yeah.
You've spent 10 years of your life podcasting about movies, but have you spent 10 years of your life podcasting about life? Choose wisely.
I don't know.
Oh, goodness. This is going to be a fun conversation. I can tell already. We've got a bunch of folks who've joined us in the live chat, who've jumped on the live stream. Hello. Welcome. Glad to see you. Glad to have you here. Feel free to say hi in the chat. And again, let us know what you thought of Spiral, the Book of Saw. For anyone who's not familiar with the format of our show, our brand new kitten is clawing my toes. Hi, Jordy. Thanks, buddy.
Hey.
We're going to talk about Spiral, the Book of Saw, spoiler-free for probably 10 or 15 minutes before we open things up to spoilers. So if you're like, I'm on the fence about this one, I don't know if I should have saw this movie already. Maybe hearing some of our thoughts will help. Anyway, Jim, Will, a lot to talk about with this film. Are you ready to just dive right in?
I think so. There's not much setup here. We'll get into it when we review the movie, though.
Yeah, let's do this.
Cool. I will try to make my puns as torture-free as possible.
There's an option where it's like me with like a meat cleaver and like my hand outstretched and you telling puns on the other side and me looking between the two of them like, do I need this hand? I've only got to listen to 4 more puns. Should I?
Oh, goodness. All right. Well, we'll try to keep it to a minimum. Hey, before we jump in, we have a few comments. One from Justin who says, haha, hey, boys. Love your reviews. Hey, handsome Justin. Good to see you. Glad
That's
you enjoy.
super nice.
Yeah, definitely. And Tony is with us. He says, hello, handsome men. Tony, hello right back.
Tony.
Good to see you.
Tony.
And Bill Z from the Comic Book Bears podcast. Hey, Bill. He was just on the show a few weeks ago helping us celebrate our 400th episode. He says, hey, fellas. Seeing Spiral this weekend. Well, Bill, you're a long-time familiar listener with this show, so you know we're going to give you the spoiler-free review before we open that can of spoilers. So hopefully we don't influence you, negatively before your viewing. But I'll be really interested, Bill, to hear your thoughts after you see it. So, Bill, friend, you must follow up with us after you've seen the movie. Let us know what you think.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you're like a Saw movie, aficionado and you've seen them all. I think this was the 8th movie. No, Will, I'm going to be corrected if there's 9. All right, we'll talk about it. But yeah. I thought it was 8, but we'll see.
All right. And Pedro is here as well. Sorry, Pedro. Welcome. Howdy. Good to have you here too. All right. I think that's all of the Romper Room hellos. let's go ahead and dive into our discussion of Spiral from the Book of Saw. All right. Will, on this podcast, I believe you are the biggest horror fan of the three of us. So it seems fitting for you to introduce this film. I do have a question for you, though, as you set this up and, of course, give us your spoiler-free thoughts. Is this movie a horror movie or is this a suspense movie? Because I've seen heated debates raging on the interwebs about which one it is, and I'm very curious. Yes, I know, believe it or not. So I'm curious, Will, how you would categorize this film.
Absolutely. So let's talk with what this movie is first. So Spiral from the Book of Saw is it's the 9th installment, believe it or not. I had to check myself on that fact earlier today too, as I was counting through them in my head, because it seems like there's less, but no, there was the original 7-film run. Then the 8th film we actually talked about on this show, which was 2017's Jigsaw. And then this becomes part 9. Yeah. Jigsaw, like it's the
that's the one I'm forgetting,
and for good reason. So Spiral has an interesting backstory. Because Chris Rock kind of famously got really excited about wanting to do a Saw movie. So he actually came up with the treatment. He came up with the idea for this. I had a conversation with, I believe it was like, the producers behind it, Stolberg, who is part of, I think, 2, 3, and 4, some of the middle Saw movies, and sort of made this pitch, hey, I really want to do this. And so much so that helped get this film made as is. The story follows Chris Rock, who plays Zeke. He's a police detective who has a bit of a bad reputation with his fellow officers, because he turned one of them in for a crime a few years back, and that's followed him. Now there's a copycat killer to the famous serial killer Jigsaw, who begins killing off people in and around the precinct, and it's up to Zeke and his partner to put together all of the pieces, pun intended, and to solve the case. And this is a fine movie. It sits kind of in the middle of the franchise. I think right in the middle of the franchise. I think that there are some way stronger films. I think part 1, for as janky as some of it was really innovative and really changed the way horror films, and it is horror film, and I'll talk about why here in a moment, really progressed through kind of the early aughts. Part 2 was really creative. Even part 6 had some pretty neat traps. Even though the franchise was sort of lagging at that point and was about to be consumed by like paranormal activity and kind of like the ghost craze that happened kind of in the late aughts. Chris Rock is fine here. He kind of works. There's some huge tonal issues with this film. Like, it bounces all over the place and not very purposefully. And I think some people are going to say that it's a Chris Rock problem. And I don't think it's a Chris Rock problem. I think it's very much like a direction problem. I think Chris Rock actually delivers what he's asked of in any given scene. I don't know that he necessarily goes above and beyond the Call of Duty with like, especially some of the more dramatic stuff. But I think he does the trick. The things that I didn't like as much, first of all, this film brought back the speed ramping during the traps, which I don't know if you remember in the early Saw movies, like whenever someone would be like in a tense moment, like the scene would like do this as it like zoomed in or zoomed out and sort of like brought the tension to a head. And it worked in the early aughts. It's really tired now, and they'd gotten away with it in 2017's Jigsaw. It's back here, and it feels super antiquated. I like the theme. This is very much a story about police and about what it is to be a police officer and to, kind of pay the piper for some of the things that I think echo a little bit of what's happening in the news cycle these days. Mm-hmm. Without getting into what it is, I think it's fair to say at this point, like one of the things that I hated the most I think the last part of this movie, like the last little stretch, is actually pretty bad. I think that there's a really good premise that's set up, even if it's not consistent. I think there's some good stuff that's sort of here. But that last section, not even the last act, I think just really kind of the off ramp at the end of this film really drops a lot of balls. And I think that this movie is like a whole star better if you just rework the ending of it. So it doesn't stick the landing. It's fine. It's fine, though. I think there's some stuff that you'll get out of it. As a horror fan, it feels familiar. It feels like a Saw movie without having quite as much of the oppressive weight of some of the lore of that franchise, which did get to really bog down some of the later films. The traps are the traps. And so if you're not that type of person that can sit through those squeamish traps, then you already know that this is probably not the film for you in that regard. So in terms of whether or not I like it or not, it's right down the middle. I'd probably recommend maybe slightly against it, but it's not like it's not like I hate this film with a burning desire or anything like that. It's just, if I've got to cast my lot somewhere, it's in the no. And Brad, to your question from before, genre is a social concept and people on the internet need to get the fuck over that. When we talk about horror to one another, like we're able to very much say like this is a horror movie because it's scary or because there's horrific violence or there's something that unsettles us or whatever it happens to be. I've been seeing a push lately where people say there has to be a supernatural element for it to be horror. And I hate that argument personally.
That's shitty gatekeeping right there.
Yeah. Genre is conversational shorthand. It is not a tried and true thing where something has to meet these criteria to be genre.
Rigid. Yeah.
It's how it feels in your gut. If I told you that Saw is a horror movie, I think the average person could reasonably say like, yeah, it feels like a horror movie, and therefore the genre holds. So that's my 2 cents there.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you so much for weighing in, Will. I know even we've had some debates on shows in the past, a few years back as to what's horror, what's suspense. And it definitely seems like over time, maybe those lines have blurred a bit and it's become a little more okay to, identify that yourself. But whether it's suspense or horror, you're in for an unsettling time with these films. And it sounds like this kind of fit that pattern for you, Will. So, Jim, how about for yourself? Was this a film that you were entertained by, you really enjoyed? Was this something that you would maybe skip? How did you feel?
Yeah, I went into this being only my second Saw movie that I've ever seen in my life. The first one being Jigsaw, which is ironically the one I forgot to count when I was counting 8 movies instead of 9. Because I think I thought that the final chapter was the last one we saw when actually it was Jigsaw, but which came after that, I think. Right? I think that came after I don't know. It doesn't really matter.
It did.
And so I saw this movie, and then I said, well, just for shits today, it was a little bit of a lull in some work. I put on the iPad. I put on the original Saw movie. Went and watched that on my iPad. And it's pretty interesting comparing it to this movie because I felt like what I was going to see was going to be a lot different than this movie. And I'm finding a lot of comparisons in terms of, kind of like the central mystery. This latest one, Spiral, and, not to rehash the labels again, Will, I agree with what you said that they are conversational shorthand for genre labels, but this one did feel like maybe more of a cop thriller to me, with some horror elements, with the Saw branding all over it, and we'll get into spoilers and how it compares, but this was kind of a mystery, kind of who who is behind what's going on. We're going to find out maybe by the end of the movie. And I do love, police thrillers and procedurals, and that kind of go to solve a crime or solve crimes, a series of crimes. So I kind of dug that aspect of this. Was this the best crime thriller or a cop thriller I've ever seen? Absolutely not. But I thought it was fine, and I agree with you, Will. I thought Chris Rock was fine. The beginning of this film was. Will, you talked about the end of the film, and we'll get into that a little bit more in spoilers. The beginning of the film was a little bit strange, setting up the Chris Rock character as somebody who's kind of on the outs with his police department. It sounds to me that's probably where Chris Rock had the most influence in terms of the movie, because there a lot of the comedy one-liners and stuff that came out were in that first, 20 or 30 minutes or so before things got kind of deadly serious at some point in the movie. There was a lot of, I think, attempts at comedy, and maybe that's where a lot of the tonal swings we're feeling kind of came in as well. But yeah, I thought this movie was fine for what it is. I thought it did the job. I thought Chris Rock was fine. Max Minghella, it's always good to see him show up and stuff. Samuel L. Jackson is in this movie. What can you say about Samuel L. Jackson? He's in the movie. He doesn't. He's not in the movie a ton, but he's in the movie. He plays Marcus Banks, who's this is no spoiler because it's in IMDb, and I think it's in the trailer that he's Chris Rock's dad in the film. And other than that, like I said, I kind of enjoyed this movie. I think to me, it's a closer cousin to the first movie than I thought it was going to be. And I enjoyed it way more than Jigsaw. I can tell you that. I didn't find Jigsaw to be very good or very memorable, because I can't really remember any of it. Well, we'll see if I can remember any of this movie in like a year or 2 years. But and maybe sometime, we can go back and talk about the first one. I was shocked to see Carrie Elwes in that. Danny Glover is in that one, I think, right? As one of the cops. So yeah, Spiral, I think to me falls on the line of, go see it. I think you're going to kind of, now if you're looking for a pure Saw movie, you may not get that. Just remember, it is heavily a cop thriller with Saw elements kind of thrown in, peppered in here as the to kind of drive the plot. But yeah, I'd say I thought it was a fine movie, entertaining. I stayed fully engaged right to the end.
Well, good. All right. Well, we have a kind of soft not recommend from Will. We have kind of a soft recommend, Jim. Is that fair to say?
Soft Sure. I would just caution hardcore Saw fans to kind of quell their expectations a little bit.
Yeah, it's from the book of Saw. It is not Saw itself. So it's, maybe a little bit different. I could see that.
So there's a book of Saw. We got to find that book.
Of Saw. Who said there'd be reading on this episode?
I know, that's so boring. Who wants to do that?
Yeah.
Well, for me, this was an interesting return to some of the earlier films. Jim, you mentioned that you had watched the first one today. I was actually wanting to go back and watch that one. So I don't know if we want to do like a bonus, I'll watch it and then we can talk about it. We could if we want to, or I could just watch it and we can talk about it ourselves. But I do feel like this is a little closer to some of the elements of the first one that weren't as like overhyped and over crazy and over insane. It was a little more subdued, but like still very much a Saw film. Chris Rock here, man, I don't know. I'm hot and cold on Chris Rock when I see him in things that I really like. What was that movie? Was it Central Intelligence a few years ago when he was with The Rock? Chris Rock and The Rock?
Yeah, I think so.
I didn't see Central Intelligence.
Okay.
So.
Well, Will, you know that comedy is really weird with me, and I laughed my ass off in that movie.
Sorry, I think you're getting The Rock. I think you're getting Chris Rock and The Rock mixed up with help me out. It wasn't him. He was not in Central Intelligence.
Oh no, you're right. Okay. Chris Rock, you don't get that credit. That's right. Anyway, my point being that the comedy with Chris Rock is just hit or miss for me sometimes. When I like Chris Rock, I like him a lot. When I don't, it's usually pretty polarizing. It was a little weird to see him in this role. The comedy was just very tonally dissonant, and I feel like it took me out of the movie a lot. There's even parts where like he'll, and it's in the trailer, he'll give like a one-liner about something and make a Chris Rock look, and it's like, wait a second, what kind of movie am I watching here? Like, is this trying to be a comedy film? And even like other actors, like in the same scene with him, have this weird look on their face, like, is this supposed to be funny? Is this supposed to be serious? I don't even know. It feels weird. So I'm not quite sure how to feel about that. Jim, you mentioned that Max Minghella is in this. We've been watching season 4 of The Handmaid's Tale. And so it was interesting to see Max pop up in something that, wasn't a Make America Great Again, like female rape show. So, seeing him play kind of a good guy detective was really kind of a nice change of pace, from Handmaid's Tale and some of the other things that we've seen him in. Samuel L. Jackson is Samuel L. Jackson. I mean, you know what you're going to get with Mr. Jackson. But I'm really anxious to kind of talk about some of the things that happen in this film. I think it's hard to kind of talk around them without getting into spoilers. But right now, when there's not a ton out to see, at least until Cruella comes out this weekend, I know a lot of people are looking forward to that. This weekend being relative to when we're recording. I mean, if you're looking for something to do, if you want a date night film, and torture porn is your idea of a good date night, then this movie could probably fit the bill. But I would say by and large, it's a little forgettable. I was entertained. It was kind of interesting, but like, I don't think this is a film that like 5 years down the road, I'm going to be like, Jim, Will, oh my God, do you remember when we saw Spiral? How cool was that? That's probably just not going to happen. So, yeah, hopefully that's fair to say.
I mean, I guarantee you we're going to be doing our end of year list, way later in the year. And we're going to be talking about what we saw, what we liked, what we didn't. And someone is going to say, oh, yeah, we saw Spiral this year. And we'll all go like, oh, yeah, that was this last year.
Did we? Oh, yeah, I guess we did.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of a blip of a film. And that's not bad necessarily either. Like, there are way worse things, Army of the Dead, that you could watch this weekend. So having this as to kind of like scratch that like horror itch, or suspense itch or thriller itch or kind of wherever you want to classify it itch, that's fine. That's fine. It does that. It doesn't do it exceptionally well, but it does it well enough.
Yeah. I like how you just slipped in your dismissal of Army of the Dead in there, Will. That was very, very expert.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I don't know, Will. I was checking your letterbox earlier today, and I think you might have had Army of the Dead a smidge higher than this movie.
Oh,
well, they're both sort of like right in kind of like the middle of the pack. But soft middle area that we all have. That soft area. The thing about Army of the Dead, without getting too far off that, the more you think about that one, the more it doesn't work. Whereas the more distance I get from Army of the Dead, the more I dislike it, and the more distance I get away from Spiral, the more like toothless it is. It's just sort of like, it's just kind of, it is what it is.
We had a close call with Army of the Dead over the weekend. Brad, do you mind if I say this?
No, go ahead. But you gotta tell the whole story though.
I will. It's kind of an interesting story. So, the last couple times we've gone to the movies, which is only like 3 or 4 times since the pandemic, things started to open up here
after vaccination.
When we've gone to Cinemark, which is our local kind of big chain movie theater that's close to our house, which we like, they've been giving away these awesome Wonder Woman 84 plastic cups that we've been like collecting, and they're great. They're solid. They're not those flimsy plastic ones, and so we're like, oh man, we got 4 of these. We got to go back and maybe try to get like 2 or 4 more of these. So we so we're like looking for something to do. We're like, hey, Army of the Dead's playing this weekend. Let's go see that. Okay, so we got tickets. We're like, and yeah, while we're there, we'll definitely get these cups. So we go in, look at the concession stand, and as I feared, they've discontinued the Wonder Woman 84 cups, which they of course had in stockpile because of the pandemic, right? They probably made these cups and distributed them, and they had to sell them months after the movie came out. Now they've been replaced with Black Widow cups. So I even asked, I asked the ticket taker, I asked the concession stand, and I asked the box office person, do you have any more of those Wonder Woman cups? And they're like, no, we don't. So we decided to bail on the movie. We drove all the way to the movie theater, had the tickets in our hand. We're going to go in, and we're like, there's no cups here. The movie's 2.5 hours of a zombie movie. Are we really down for this? We looked at each other and said, nah, let's go out to eat instead. So that's what we did. So we did. We actually haven't seen the movie yet.
So you didn't tell the full story. So after we leave the first theater, which you went to see a movie with us at. I think we saw the Detective Pikachu movie there with you. So it was the one that was like 35 minutes from our house. So after that, we're on our way to go out to eat somewhere, and Jim's like, "Why don't you call a different theater and see if they have them?" So I called the theater, and no one's picking up. And he's like, "Well, we'll just stop in." So we drive another 25 minutes to get to this other theater, and Jim goes in, and I just stayed in the car. And so he comes out, and he's just like shaking his head and looking all dejected. They didn't have them either.
No.
You'll be interested to know, babe, I did call Park Place, and I did speak to somebody, and they don't have them either. So
yeah,
they're gone.
I'm going to put a call out now for anyone that's listening to this right now. If you have the Wonder Woman cups at your local theater, ask for some, set them aside, and send us a message. It sounds like this is something that, like, sadly left our lives before we were able to say like a proper goodbye to it. So if we were able to get like one more of those cups in Brett and Jim's hands, I think that would be an absolute
I would pay top dollar and shipping to get 4 more of those cups. So if anybody knows where I can get them,
look, other shows have like a Patreon or they have Amazon wish lists. We just want a cup, a cup.
That's right.
Hook us cup. Anyway,
the quest for the golden chalice is still
right. It continues. Well, fellas, I don't know how deeply into spoilers we're gonna want to get. This may be a little bit of a short show, but I feel like we should make that jump. Justin says noted about the cups. Justin, thanks so much, friend. We appreciate you very much. Jim, Will, are you ready for spoilers for Spiral from the Book of Saw?
We got some things to talk about. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
So at this point, then, spoilers for Spiral from the Book of Saw are officially fair game. If you have not seen Spiral from the Book of Saw, boy, do I hate that title, and you value your virginal innocence where the plot of the film is concerned, this is your chance to step away for about 15, maybe 20 minutes. And then if you want to come back towards the end for some plugs, feel free. If you're listening through the magic of digital tape delay via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or however you consume your podcast, feel free to skip ahead as needed using the time index in those handy-dandy show notes that Jim lovingly will have crafted for you by the time you're listening to this episode. But all of that said, ramble to give you a chance to step away if you need to. Spoilers are happening. It's totally a thing. Jim, Will, question for you. Did you immediately clock that it was the Detective Zenk character that was going to be the
absolutely
yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit. That was pretty obvious.
Very transparent. The way he was brought in to the case, number one. Number two, this is a trope that you see in a lot of crime movies where somebody is murdered and there's a child. Now, they didn't show the child, but they did reference the family, I believe. And I'm like, okay, this guy's definitely taking revenge on the cops for murdering his father. Yeah, I had it pegged. I'm like, dude, he's the son of the guy who was murdered. He looks about the right age. And yeah, I mean, that took a little bit of sting out of the movie for me. So here's the thing with movies like this, where you're trying to figure out like who's done it. Like, the writing can err on the side of being a little too obvious and relying on some like way too obvious tropes. And it can also go the other way and be so like out of the blue that you're like, what the fuck? It could have been like anybody. It doesn't hold any resonance. It doesn't hold any resonance. Like, oh, it's this other character that we barely even saw the whole movie, and they brought in at the end, and he did the whole thing. So this one did not hit the sweet spot when it comes to kind of paying off the mystery.
Here's the thing about the Saw films as a whole is that there often is a whodunit style twist that's part of the franchise. And, from the very first film having a very notable moment in the last moments that sort of like recontextualizes what you just saw, to a major character being revealed in a major spot in, honestly, 2 through 7, like they're all like, all those films are about kind of like who's the other person or that sort of stuff. By itself, being able to outthink a film doesn't make it a bad film. Like that's one thing that, and I think we've talked about that before here in the past. Like, you watch enough movies, we watch a lot of movies, you start to pick up on writing techniques. And so I'm probably not surprised by the majority of surprise twist movies that we watch, but that's okay, because I still need to be able to, I can still connect to something. I can still feel something. I can still just be taken along for the ride, even if I kind of see where it's going. This one was a little different though, because you have sort of two things that work against it in unison. One, the twist does clock itself really easily. There's a trap in the middle of the movie where that character gets killed.
Yes, that was the point.
That was the smoking gun. Like, there was a lot of things that were like leaning towards him very closely before that, but everyone else fit a very specific motive, and you could tell like why they were being targeted, and you could see kind of like they would play like whatever the tape was that they had to listen to. But then we just get to him, and he's like, oh, also this wonderful guy who was a family man, he was killed. That's sad. Anyway, moving on. And the whole time you're like, well, where's his tape? What was his trap? What was his sin? What did he do wrong? And when the filmmakers specifically don't show that, then it tells you that there's something being covered up there. But it's made even worse. I think that you could still have had that, and the ending, if the ending of the movie like really nailed some of the other stuff, I think you could get away with that. You can have a bad twist if your ending is good, but if you have a bad twist and then your ending just sort of peters out, all you're left there with is sort of like expectations of what could have been, and that's what I got from this.
Yeah, the motive for that killing wasn't there. You're right, Will. It didn't match up. And not only that, I think in the other killings we actually saw like a body that was kind of recognizable. And in this one, they pulled out an arm with a tattoo on it, which like obviously can be faked, right? And the rest, I think the murder was supposedly so grisly that there was like hardly anything left of the rest of the body, right? So I'm like, that's a little fishy. Like, this guy is kind of a main character and he just kind of disappears from the plot of the movie. And they're like, you're right, Will. They're like, let's move on. And that was the point where I put together, and that's okay. It's okay. I just wish they hadn't played that hand.
You could have worked around it really easily. Imagine if Jigsaw left, like, let's say you do the exact same thing, but also Jigsaw leaves a tape recorder that says, Detective Young Guy, I forget his name, you cheated to get ahead of your classes. Like, he could have just lied and told like a bullshit story about why he was also complicit or something like that. You're a really bad cop because you stole candy from a baby one. I don't know. Just make some shit up. If you're Jigsaw, leave that tape there and then let the audience hear that. And even if you don't see the rest of it, you can at least go like, oh man, gee, this Jigsaw is really kind of grasping, reaching out there. He's unpredictable. Who knows what it could be? But instead, like that's the minimum you could have done. And they didn't do that.
It's almost like they went too far. Like they didn't have to go that far to like kill this character off in such a way to raise your suspicion. You know what I mean? They I don't know. It's like they wanted to make the movie wanted to make it such a big surprise. Like, oh my God, it's the guy who's supposed to be dead. He comes back and he's the killer. The movie wanted that, but instead, I think they went the other way and kind of tilted their hand a little too much. Like, oh, that's a little obvious.
Have you ever like spilled wine on something and then you try to like wipe it up, and in the process of trying to hide it, you've actually made the stain way more obvious? That's kind of like the way they handled this kill was sort of like this, like, you know, by like, oh no, don't look over here. It's not really him. It actually drew way more attention to the fact that it was him.
Yeah. And not only that, but I guess we're going to have more of these films. The way that the ending is left open, I mean, he gets away. You know, the Samuel Jackson character, I guess, is dead after all those gunshots, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
I'd say so.
Zeke Banks character wants revenge for his daddy. So how many of these Book of Saw movies are we going to get?
Well, that's the other spoiler. There is no book. I'm just saying there is no Book of Saw. So
I was expecting a book to show up the whole movie, like a book that the original killer had like left behind with like, you know, designs for traps or something, you know, like at least to explain the title. But
no, it was actually there were scenes cut into this movie where an old grandfather was reading the Book of Saw to his young grandson in bed. And
Grandpa, is this a killing book?
And they had to cut that all out, but they kept the title.
I guess killing's not so bad.
Yeah. Oh boy. The other thing that gave it away, by the way, is right after the murder of his name was Detective Schenk. Chris Rock was going to go tell the guy's widow, right? Or family or whatever. He was on his way to tell them, and like, oh, okay, the jig's going to be up when he goes and tell, but he never, that thing totally goes away. Like, I don't know whether he got sidetracked by another murder or whatever, like on the way to the house, but that never happened. That part never happened. So, but yeah, I mean, that was crazy. You're right, Brad. The killer does get away at the end, which is kind of, you know, obviously setting up another movie. There
is some sort of like talk to, like, we're not just because of the way the film has been set up, but they do want to cautiously look at the numbers of this one, but potentially like kind of turn out more of these films in the franchise. So they did leave themselves an opening.
Spiral 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I also want to, I mean, Will, you mentioned that you didn't like the way the end of the movie was handled. Was that tied into kind of the overriding theme here of like, we've got a lot of stuff in the news these days about police and what's going on in police forces and how bad cops, quote unquote, are, you know, perhaps maybe giving all of the police forces a bad name, and how, you know, what police unions can do to kind of keep these bad cops in control. This movie touches on that a little bit. I wish it had gone further. I wish it had actually gone further. Maybe it will in the second movie. We don't know. But that did happen. Will, I don't know if your reaction to the end of the movie had anything to do with that or not.
It didn't. I think the ground that they're exploring here, you know, a Jigsaw who is trying to use all of the Jigsaw movies are about, you know, John Kramer and his sense of like, his warped moral compass and his disciples who follow that same thing as they try to teach people to be better human beings. Just fucked up, but, you know, like, that's like the core of that. And you've got a version of that now, someone who is not a John Kramer disciple, someone who instead is sort of borrowing the aesthetics of it for his own moral compass, which is cleaning out police corruption, you know, by force. I think that's an interesting place to explore, and I think the film did start to explore it. What I didn't like about the ending was sort of twofold. One, boy, that ending is super abrupt. Like, just like shit happens and then credits roll. Like, there is no kind of like tapering off at all. But even worse, I really felt like the Max Mangella, yeah, Max Mangella character, Detective Shank, his the way that he, like his like intelligence level, because these killers are all like super intelligent, right? Just really kind of petered out there at the end. Like his last thing is like he's basically been grooming the Chris Rock character, like to bring him on as his own disciple, right? And you could tell that that's what he wanted in his mind, was him and the Chris Rock character to ride off into the sunset and just like be taking out police departments left and right. He does this via trap that's, all right, last trap. All you have to do is shoot this thing and save your father or kill me. Like, so it doesn't actually test his morality. The choice that he's given is save your father or murder me. When really, like, I think if this Jigsaw wanted to do that, it really could have been the other way around. Just sort of like, if you want to prove that you've got this, your dad was the guy that's responsible for all of this. So you can be responsible for his death if you really want all these other good things to happen or not, So I think they really twisted around kind of like what the choice was there at the end. They gave him an easy out. I don't think anyone would have not oh, I'll just save the dad character, not murder him, even if I have to go chase the guy. Even if my instinct is like, I want to join him. Cool. I can save my dad and join him. I want to fight him. Okay. I can save my dad and then just go fight him. Like, there's a lot of things that you could have done while still doing the save your dad choice. So it was like sort of like it didn't really fit the spirit of the gruesome decisions that Saw forces on its characters.
Yeah, it is interesting. You have two characters here in, the Max Minghella, Detective Shank character, and Detective Banks, Chris Rock's character. Chris Rock is obviously, he wants to fix the situation of having bad cops, bad actors in the force, right? He's kind of a force for good within the police. He's turned in somebody who committed a murder within the police force, and he's paying the price for that. And he's being strong and trying to kind of walk that line of righteousness. Even though he's kind of a loose cannon a little bit, he's still generally a good cop, right? And he's trying to do a good thing and clean up the police force. But then you got the Max Minghella character who's coming at it they're trying to do the same thing. And I think that's touched on in the movie a little bit, maybe in that last scene when they talk to each other. But obviously coming at it from different angles and with different actions. So I think that's good. I wish it was explored just a little bit more, I think, to make that point.
So Justin has a question in the chat. He says, so kind of rushed then or no?
Yeah.
Yeah. A little bit. But it's also like, I think that I think that like part of the problem with the formula here is that the end tries to cram a lot of its stuff into like a small package at the very end. But I think the other part of it too is that I don't know that it did all of the work to set up all of the payoff that it was trying to get. So some of it is really kind of how it came across there at the end, but some of it is a little bit more foundational kind of throughout the script as a whole. Like it needed it's one of those random bullshit things that people say about movies sometimes, but I'll say it here. I think the script needed another pass.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. I would agree. Well, fellas, I don't know that I have a whole lot left to say on Spiral from the Book of Saw. Any final thoughts from you guys?
You know what this is better than? If you're talking about like police detective stories, kind of that kind of straddle that sort of like line between suspense and horrific killings. Remember when we watched The Little Things earlier this year with
I was just thinking of that earlier, yeah.
This is way better than that, at least. So
I thought you were going to go the other way with it. I'm surprised.
Oh no, that was just a fundamentally bad movie. This is just a fundamentally like when you put everything together, tepid movie, but it's not bad. It's just it's not sharp enough to leave an impact.
Remind me, the little things just came up like the other day, babe, and I don't know what the context was, but remind me that movie.
We were playing D&D, and I had my like D&D combat station playing, and it plays a lot of movie soundtracks. It was playing a song from that. I was looking at the cover art and I'm like, The Little Things, what the fuck movie is that? And I had to like think about it for a second. And then I was like, oh, right. That was a movie that we saw. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
who was in it?
Boy. Denzel Washington, Jared let himself go, and who was the other person?
Rami Malek. Remember Rami Malek playing the detective, like the boy detective?
This throwback to like the 90s like detective. Yes.
Rami Malek played a detective with like the same amount of like sincerity as like three kids stacked up in a trench coat. Like that movie.
That was the one. All right. Well,
I'll just say my final thought is, and it's not really a spoiler. I'm on team Chris Rock to see if he can like leverage off this to maybe do another part. Not Spiral 2. I know he'll probably do Spiral 2, but like kind of continue this dramatic to find another dramatic role that might fit him and see what he can, if he can stretch his chops out a little bit.
He is in, or he is going to be in. There's a David O. Russell film, which isn't quite a drama, but it's not exactly the same type of comedy that he's for. That's in post production. IMDb doesn't not have a lot for it, but it's post production. David O. Russell made it. That's like the Silver Linings Playbook and all that guy. But it's Anya Taylor-Joy, Timothy Olyphant, Margot Robbie, and Chris Rock are all in it. So. You might get De Niro's in it, Christian Bale. There's a lot of people attached to this, so you might get your wish. I don't think it's going to be a straight up dramatic piece, but there might be something at least for him to sink his teeth into.
Cool.
We will see. All right. Well, let's move on to some very quick plugs as we look to wrap up our show for this week. This is the part of the show where we put things on your radar that we maybe enjoyed, we think you might enjoy. Let's go to Will. Will, what have you got for us this week?
So I would recommend, on the subject of horror movies, I would strongly recommend if you have Shudder, and you should have Shudder. It's one of the most, I think, the highest quality of film to cost streaming platforms or add-ons that's out there right now. They've been doing the Joe Bob Briggs late night drive-in show type thing. He's an old school film critic, and a TV host going back into like the 80s and beyond.
Oh yeah.
And he always does like horror films, and so he hosts these like horror movie nights. And they're all on Shudder, usually like 2 movies every Saturday. And he provides just so many like facts and just sort of interesting things about the films that they're doing. This last weekend, I caught up with a few. He recently did Ginger Snaps and Mandy and Dead and Buried, just like a bunch of like really varied movies, Ginger Snaps to Mandy, then all the way back to the 80s with Dead and Buried. Like that was a really good stretch of movies for me, and it really scratched the horror itch that Spiral didn't for me, but I know that these curated films are out there, so check them out. Joe Bob Briggs is the goods, and these horror movies that he's talking about are always entertaining, even when they're bad.
Well, I'm sorry that Spiral didn't scratch your horror itch, but we do have another Conjuring movie coming up pretty soon, right?
Yes, we do. So
there's always that to look forward to.
A movie.
The Lorraine and what's his name?
Ed Warren.
Ed and Lorraine Warren.
And Lorraine Warren. Yeah. Different strokes for different folks. That's not one that trips my trigger, but it does for several people. So I'm excited on the behalf of the people that are excited for it.
There you go.
Well, it'll be a real horror movie because it'll be a legit, like, bona fide horror movie because it does have supernatural elements.
It's supernatural, so it counts.
There you go. All right. Well, for me this week, I'm gonna plug a video game. Back in the mid 2000s, a series of games came out called Mass Effect, and I remember everyone going crazy for these games, how awesome they were, how your choices really, like changed the world and changed the game, and everyone's game was different. I never had a chance to catch up with those games, unfortunately. But about a week ago, a re-release of all three games called Mass Effect Legendary Edition came out. All three games have been remastered. The graphics are amazing. Apparently, they fixed a ton of the bugs that used to plague players like crazy. So I decided, all right, well, this is my chance to finally see what this whole Mass Effect thing is about. I'm about 12 hours into the first game, and I'm just absolutely loving it. It's really a choose-your-own-adventure story. If you could turn one of those books into a really cool narrative sci-fi adventure that spans the galaxy and takes you through space, military actions, and political intrigue, and like Game of Thrones level manipulation stuff. It's pretty awesome. So if you're like me, you haven't had a chance to play the Mass Effect games yet, but it sounds interesting to you, now's absolutely your opportunity to do so. You're really getting three games, and each game is like easily 40 plus hours of entertainment. So, I mean, if you spend the $60, you could spend that on a nice meal out to eat, or you could spend that on like 60 hours worth of fun. But just something to put on your radar for me. And Will, I don't know if you ever played those games, Stall, but if you ever get a sci-fi RPG bug, it's a good one to go to.
That'll be a good itch to also scratch.
Indeed. Well, listen, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in this week. As always, it's a pleasure having you with us in the live chat. We know we record on a weeknight. It's a school night. And so not everyone's always able to join us live. But for those of you who did, Bill and Justin and the other folks, thank you so much for being here. We're going to close out with a question from Justin, actually. He says, anything on the new movie Profile? Do you guys have any thoughts on that? I know you're super plugged in.
I think that I'm trying to remember if it's which one it is, because there's the Timur Bekmambetov movie from 2018 that I saw when it was like going through the festival rounds. I haven't watched to see if it's the same one that Justin's mentioning, but if so, I
think good. I think you might be talking about the new one that just came out. That's like, it's like a documentary footage, but it's like fictional social media.
Social media.
Yeah. That's the one. Okay, yeah. So that's the one. It's they're using like social media to like people from ISIS to like lure women to like Syria,
right? And
this journalist like goes in and like, you know, she's going to try to do it. Yeah. Okay. So that's cool. I didn't realize that was coming out. Yeah. I watched that during kind of like the festival circuit a few years back. It's actually really good. It's disturbing because, you know, this is a thing that's actually happens. You know, people do get lured in by these recruiters, and they get you know, sometimes even against their best judgment, or they get preyed upon. And in this case, the way it's all done, kind of like we've seen this a few times where it's all inside of someone's computer screen, you know, but this one does it effectively. Yeah. So good question, Justin. I recommend it. It's good.
Was it called Profile back then? Because I vaguely remember a movie like it, or maybe I'm just confusing it with, there's like 4 or 5 other movies that we saw that were very similar, like the people online, you know, being.
I believe it was called Profile then.
Okay.
I'll tell you the story of it afterwards, because I saw it outside of the festival proper, so I cannot tell the story on air.
Okay.
All
Fair enough.
right, cool. Well, hopefully that answers your question, Justin. Thanks so much for tuning in and asking that. Folks, just a heads up to you. We are going to be off next week, but we'll be back the week after. Have a wonderful holiday if you're here in the United States. Looking forward to being back in the saddle with you all. I think we said we were going to do Cruella. What was the second movie?
Probably A Quiet Place.
Yes,
A Quiet
A
Place
Quiet
2.
Place 2. We're going to call the episode A Quiet Cruella
Another
Place.
Quiet Place.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway,
A
so
Cruella Place.
A Cruella Place. So see Cruella, see A Quiet Place Part 2 between now and 2 weeks from now. And then we will all sit down and have a nice fireside chat about those two films. All right.
Right.
Goodbye, everybody. Take care. Be safe. Have fun. See ya.
Bye.
Bye-bye.